Okay, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar sponsored by Women in ORMS and Informs. Today's webinar will focus on the ingredients to make analytics work, and our speaker is Dr. Rina Schneur, an operations research scientist who has focused her career on applying analytics methodologies to industry problems. She was the 17th president of Informs, has been serving on the Informs Pro Bono Analytics Committee since its launch, and has been the VP of iForce representing North America since January 2022. Women in ORMS was established in 1995 with the purpose of encouraging discussion among individuals with an interest in issues faced by women in the ORMS profession. Please consider becoming a member of WORMS. Dr. Schneur is a member of the Informed Speakers Program, which curates expert speakers in operations research, analytics, and management sciences. Substantial financial support is available to chapters to help defray the costs. More information can be found on informs.org. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you again for participating today. Dr. Schneur, let's get started.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you everybody for joining. So we are going to talk a little bit today about cooking some analytics. I kind of thought that this is a good analogy of the way we are working and developing analytics methodologies and solutions to actually when we cook, because there is some recipes that you need to follow, some guidelines, but also some art and innovation. And the focus eventually is how the client, the customer, the diner in the cooking analogy feels and is satisfied. So let's get started with a little bit of background. I just want to point out that the talk today is high level. There are really no formulas of any kind. And it's really mostly geared for people that are either working in the as practitioners or as academics, but with some outside clients, as well as people that have been doing it for some time and maybe can be kind of realize some of what will be discussed and recognize it, or maybe disagree. And I really want to open it kind of for questions and for discussions as much as time allowed. So my background, as Jill mentioned, is as a practitioner. And the main areas where I worked in large corporations, in small businesses, and in startups, is mostly in supply chain, logistics, and telecom. So I will kind of draw back from those, let's say, verticals, but really what I'm talking about is really applied to almost everything or any vertical. So about 10 years ago, the board of Informs, after a lot of discussion, described analytics as the scientific process of transforming data into insight for making better decisions. And really our part is on the transformation side, part, right? That's what we do. We take the data and we transform it into insight. And the insight is really just an intermediate goal, because eventually our goal is to make better decisions and really make an impact. And also there has been quite a lot of transformation in the past, I would say 10, 12 years, because we're really, let's say 12 or 15 years ago, we were struggling of explaining what operations research is, what we are really doing, why is it so great. And today everybody understands what analytics is. So maybe that's a lesson in a different, for a different time in marketing. But really today, analytics is across the board, from large and small corporation, from non-profits organization, in the government, not just in the military where it has been for a long time, but also in politics. Campaigns use analytics to target voters. So that really, and everybody knows about it. And in addition, it kind of goes across function. from the strategic decisions to maybe more marketing, how to, you have all these ads now on TV that are targeted to you as a client, to your household, to sales, to operation, to customer service. And actually, at one of my last positions at Verizon, I'll talk a little bit about it a bit more. We kind of worked with all those functions of the organization. So it's kind of nice to see how different or part of the organizations use analytics in a different way, but still all recognize today the benefit of it. And just kind of another little background that I'm sure a lot of you have heard before is when we talk about analytics, we talk about descriptive analytics, which is what happened, diagnostics, which kind of was added a little bit later. Why did it happen? Predictive, relying on the previous two, what will happen? And then given that, prescriptive analytics, what do we need to do, write a prescription? And all that leads us to gaining insight, as I said, in order to make better decisions, but really the ultimate goal is to make an impact on whatever entity we are working with. And typically, not always, kind of the skill level of the complexity of the analytics goes up as we progress through this arrow, and level of business impact is the same. So what's different today, why we are so ready for it? Because we have lots and lots of data. And there are all these slogans. Big data, of course, is used a lot. And it means a large volume, large variability, large volatility, but it's also very good data. And also we can really process it and manage it quite well. And you can see some of the quotes. Some of them are a bit older because that was the time when people had the aha moment and realized how great is analytics and how much difference it can make. So I'll let you I'm not going to read the quotes, but you also see that they span from people in the academia, in the business world, in the media world, and the president. I'll just give you a moment to look at that. And so here we are, we have great data, we can process it all. What do we do with all this data? That's kind of where we come in, right? How do we use this data, and how do we use it, not just use it, but use it correctly? So how can we interpret the information that comes from the analytics and interpret it correctly and benefit from it? Again, I'll probably mention it many times. The main goal is to make an impact, whatever impact it may be. And here is another quote from 2010. So the lack of understanding of analytics is where the top barrier was, and still is to some extent. A lot of people talk about analytics, but not always as a customers, but they don't always realize the depths of it. So analytics in telecom. So as I mentioned, one of the areas I worked in is telecom. I'm not going to too much go into it, but more I'll mention a couple of things from logistics and telecom to give some context to our discussion. But really, it's kind of a data haven. There's lots and lots of data. Even now, we are on the Zoom together. That's a data point for your provider to know that you just joined via this Zoom URL, right? Any phone call, any text. And because of that, great system infrastructures have been developed. And that led to great opportunities across the various business aspects, like I mentioned before, from marketing and sales to strategy and operation and customer service, really across all this spectrum of analytics. So as I mentioned, I'll draw back from my experience, but it really, most of it, if not all of it, is relevant in many other contexts. So they kind of, to put it in very high level, the process when we are developing an analytics solution, and not always following this in like in order. We initialize the project, let's say, we call it. We define what problem we have at hand. We are doing some modeling. We collect data. We develop, once we have a solution, we develop some tool by which we deliver the solution and the results on a one-time or ongoing basis. We, of course, need to keep testing and revising. And finally, it needs to be implemented. So we realize, you all now know, the impact that can be made. And there are many challenges ahead in each of these areas. And we'll kind of go into those in a bit more depth during this talk. So let's get cooking. What kind of ingredients? I'm going to talk about key ingredients to make analytics happen. And when I do that, again, very little, but I want to give some context to some of the discussion. So I'm going to draw back from one problem that's very common in other industries as well, but in telecom, it's called the garage location. It's really a location allocation type of problem. So in the telecom, you have garage centers where you have a lot of equipment and where the technicians come in the morning and say, okay, what do I need to do today? There are wire centers, which are kind of, maybe your town is a wire center. Each wire center has a central office, it's called, and also all the consumers and businesses that it serves. And the technician needs to go either to this central office or to one of the customers to fix a problem. And so these garages, the wire centers, are allocated to garages. So technicians, when they come, they will get jobs in one of the wire centers that's connected to their garage. So one solution can be that some garages, of course, serve a few wire centers, but also sometimes a wire center can be served by a couple of garages. So that's one solution. But you can see that sometimes it's pretty costly because you have quite a lot of garages that serve those wire centers. So the context of this problem was when we were approached and say, okay, we need to close some of these garages, which ones we close. For example, here could be a solution where we closed two, we kept two, and now we serve the wire centers. Each one is served by one garage. So just keep that in mind when we will mention some of the ingredients as it's related to this kind of problem. So let's start with the first ingredient, and that's the client. And that's the most important ingredients of our analytics, because the client really controls how it will be implemented and how much impact eventually you will realize. So when you talk about getting a client, what's important in a good client? What really defines a good client? First of all, you have to have a sponsor. It can be from your organization. And when I say your organization, it can be, right, it can be a group providing solutions to other groups in your organization, like I did at Verizon, or it can be that you have other customers, you sell a product, or it can be that you're in academia and you work with a project sponsor. So a sponsor is somebody that really advocates for the project, but also has a lot of influence. So they can make things happen for the project and move it forward. And then you need, in addition, a partner client. And when the focus here is on a partner, because the partner really needs to feel, the client really needs to feel they are part of this. They have an invested interest and invested, really they are invested in this whole analytics endeavor, and they are part of it, and they are your partner, because otherwise there will always be pushbacks, or more pushbacks than when they feel like they are partners. And there are various ways to secure a client. If you have done it a little bit, you know, there are kind of the pull-push situation. Sometimes a client can come and say, wow, I have this great problem. I'm not sure how I'm tackling it. Can you help me with analytics? And sometimes it's a push project where you realize, or somebody in the organization, let's say even somebody higher up in the organization, realize that there is a problem, and they say, hey, we need to bring some analytics and solve it. Sometimes it's a bit more challenging in a push situation, because you, again, needs to get the client on your side. So really the key here is to team with a trusting, influential client. And you will see a lot when we talk about each ingredient. I'll summarize it with this one line at the end, but the words are very carefully selected. So each word is really important. We need the client to trust us, to be our partner, and to also this client and the sponsor to have a say and be able to push the project forward. So we go to the second ingredient, and that's the problem. So usually the client comes and there is, let's say, a business, we call it a business problem, right? Even though it may not be in business, maybe in government or in politics, as we just mentioned. The challenge here is to extract the business problem and then to translate it into the analytic problem. That's hard. One thing you need to do very carefully is listen. There is a lot of listening, because eventually the customer knows the problem, the business problem, the best. But you also need to rely on some of your experience, because you want to make sure that you eliminate some of the noise, so you don't get bogged down with some details that eventually may not matter much, or that maybe cannot be resolved. And yet focus on the main areas of where you can tackle and what's important. And then you need to, of course, keep asking questions so you can figure out what's missing, and then incorporates it into reality. So for example, let's just go back to this garage problem, right? So we had two types of clients in a way that were opposing each other almost in their interest. We have real estate. What they want is to close garages because they pay a lot, or they lease it, or they can sell it. And then we have the customer service, the technicians organizations. They want the technicians to be as close to the customer, because they want to make sure, they don't have to drive a lot and they don't have to pay them too much, but also we want the customer to get, a quick response. So in a way, you want to close some garages to save the garage cost, but you want to make sure that customer service remains. And you need to kind of go into the details of what does it mean to have a garage? What kind of cost going into that? Some of the hidden costs, for example, when you have a technician that lives further, maybe they need to drive further. That's more cost, because now they get into overtime. Things like that you wouldn't know from the get-go, but are very important. And then you need to do something that's kind of, I think, hard for us as people that have kind of some degree, let's say, and experience in analytics. We always like to move things to perfection, right? To make sure this gap, right? The optimization gap is down to 0.00%, 1%. But really what we need to do is to balance this really desire of perfection with something that's manageable and you can implement, both in scope and in time. And the last thing I would say about the way to define, to work on defining the problem. So listening is key. Figuring out what's important and what's missing is key, but be humble. Even though we, of course, know more about the methodologies, and we may even see how we can already figure out this problem and solve it into this particular model and its great location allocation problem. But we really need to be humble and listen to the client and listen to some of their pushbacks too, because some of them may be very relevant. And we want to make sure that we don't end up solving a problem that's not realistic. And we will see later, I'll just tee it up now, what happens when we miss something. So again, listen many times, learn, and then do the best to extract the right problem. So let's move to the third ingredient, something we are all familiar with, the data collection. I won't go much into that. We need to collect the data. We need to chase a lot of data. It's all C's, as you can imagine. You need to cleanse it, clarify some of the data, maybe complete something that's missing but needed, and then, of course, control the quality of the data. So I would just say, again, balance the accuracy with time to market. If you maybe can estimate something, may not be 100% accurate, but otherwise you just get bogged down chasing the data and eventually miss the time where you really need the solution. And that leads to our fourth ingredient, the modeling approach. So we are now into ingredient 4. And in the first ingredient, right, we kind of talked about the client. That's maybe the most foreign ingredient to us, because we usually not used to kind of chase clients, do the sales part of it, and also work with the client to make sure they're satisfied and partner with them. We have the problem definition. Maybe that would be the most challenging part, because you need to do all this translation, and it's very important how you do it with what you come up with. Then you have the data, which is maybe the most tedious part, and we all know it takes a long time and takes a lot of the resources of any analytics work. And now comes the modeling, maybe the most fun part for us, right? So we all know how to model, we love these things, but again, we need to balance the complexity and the desire of perfection with what is really needed, the core part, and what we can really do and make better, not necessarily best, but make better is good, right? I now, in some of my recent endeavors, I learned to use a lot the phrase that says, don't let the perfect stand in the way of the good. So similar things, right? We need to balance. Getting a better solution will already make an impact, save money, improve customer service, may not be the best at this point. And then often we need, in order to model something very complex, to break it into pieces. You know, I'm sure you all know about decomposition. Sometimes in this garage problem, for example, we could either break it by state or even by region, take few garages at a time and optimize them. So that will be more by space. In other types of modeling, you can break the solution by time of horizon. Sometimes you need to make more strategic decision. And then as time goes by, you make more tactical decisions and you take those as input to your operational decision, and that you can really work and update more quickly. So different types of decomposition. And again, make sure the necessary elements are incorporated, which kind of said the unnecessary elements may not need to be. And choose the right level of analytics, only as complex as you need. And it's okay if sometimes a solution is not a large mathematical programming integer problem, or a large data mining type of methodology. It can be sometimes descriptive, right? And if that works, if you can describe something and that leads to a great insight, and that's all you can do for now, it's still better. Of course, usually we aspire for much more, and we can do much more. But the point is, just make sure you're at the right level and not overdo it, but not underdo it either. And then, again, I mentioned this optimization gap, settle for the needed level of optimality. Now, I want to take just a quick side break here and say that today, I mentioned in the beginning, analytics is kind of pervasive. It's everywhere. It's across business functions and across business types. And many people are doing it. So that's great because people know what analytics is. You don't need to sell as much. But it's also a problem because a lot of time everybody says, oh, we are already doing analytics, right? We graph something, we do some Excel spreadsheets, we are already doing analytics. So we have that in a way situation, and sometimes that analytics is good and sometimes it's not so good, and sometimes the data is not so good, but that client or that whoever just told you that is not really aware of it. So there is a lot of selling to do on that part. Maybe not on what's the benefit of analytics, but what's of the benefit of advanced analytics and what can be done much more or maybe much better, if that's the case. So that's kind of the fourth ingredients. We are about halfway through our recipe here about the ingredients. And I also want to make sure if you have questions, put them in the Q&A in the chat, and Jill will follow and ask me mostly at the end. So with this modeling ingredient, again, every word is important. Innovate. So don't let go of innovation. Innovate, but at the same time, avoid over complexity. And that brings us to the fifth ingredient. And that's the solution tool. So now let's say you already define the problem, you have great client, you work the data, you're satisfied with it, and you came up with a great model and you can run it and all good. Now you need to deliver a solution with to the client that is something sustainable that can be used. So having a great model is great, but not enough. Even if it's backed by great data, and even if the client is a great partner, you need to deliver the solution in a vehicle, let's say, that will make it live for the lifetime that it needs to live. So you need to have some flexibility. A lot of time, let's say in this garage optimization, for example, this type of problem, you don't solve every day. So maybe once a year, once every 2 years. So that's kind of not usually a problem because we as the analytics, the business analytics group, we can run it for the client on those instances. But oftentimes, you need to really deliver it to the client and they keep using and running the analytics and interpret the solution. So you need to embed it into something maybe they already have, or you need to build it into a little tool that they can just put their input, maybe some parameters, have some visualization, And what's important is that that tool will derive a solution in a timely manner. Timely, not just when the solution is needed, but when they click the button run, they don't want to wait too long, whatever too long means for the context of the problem. And another time aspect, of course, is time to market. That's used a lot in marketing and in sales, or mostly marketing. But really, if you develop a great solution, by the time you provided the solution, the client moved on, maybe the problem is no longer relevant, they had to find another solution, didn't do anything, right? You didn't impact anything, even though you created a great model and it's maybe even good for a great paper, but didn't make the impact. So really make sure you have a delivery mechanism of the tool that's effective, that's very user-friendly, and it's timely. In this particular case of the garage, because we were running it, just a very simple tool that will show the client how, the different costs. So I mentioned there are kind of the real estate cost, the lease and cost of operating the garage, and then there is the cost of the driving and labor cost for the technician, and of course there is a hidden cost of the customer service. What happens if you miss a time window? We know, as being consumer of telecom, we don't like when they miss a time window that's already long enough, right? So so all these costs, but if we develop, in this particular case, this was a larger problem, not just the one I showed on the graph. So the decision was to close 15 garages across the scope of the problem. And really what the client eventually takes away, once they trust you that all the input is correct and the results are correct, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, they see the 44% reduction in overall cost for the corporation. And they literally go to the bank with this. And that's what they will mention in future meetings and in to the high aboves. And so you need to deliver a solution that eventually will give them the tools to not only implement that solution, but also sell it in a way. And so that leads us to the 6 ingredients. And that's the results. So we just mentioned that we need a tool that will deliver the results in various ways. And we talked about some of the need for visualization and for explanation. That's where the client, this partner client, comes back to be very useful, because if the client trusts you, they will trust the results. But we also need to deliver very solid results, right? Because sometimes this is the first project we are doing with this client, and we really need to gain the trust. We need really them to trust the analytics. It's not even about us, but it's about the analytics, the methodology, because sometimes it's a black box kind of, right? The model is in a way a black box for most, but really they need to trust the result. So in order to do that, we need to validate again and again, make sure, question what's going on, why is this the results, be able to explain the results, and also be ready for the oops moment that maybe you couldn't avoid, but also maybe happened, because remember back then when we defined the problem, we missed one element, and that's what happens. So I'm going to give you particular examples of these last 2 points here, the explanation, the need to explain and question, and also the oops moment. But again, you need to vet the results, test again and again, question the model yourself, the assumptions, the data again and again, until you are very confident and able to deliver solid results. So we are going to go now to a little bit of a logistics to illustrate those couple of points in the previous slide. So this is an overnight shipment, kind of like UPS, FedEx, that we were involved with. It's not one of those, I'll just say. There is a hub, there are aircrafts, airplanes that go, right, pick up shipments from various cities, usually city airports, in the evening, then delivery to the hub. It gets sorted out, one hub, and then it gets delivered in the morning to the destination locations. So, right, you have this pickup route. So that's one solution, the light blue. And then you have the dark blue, which is the delivery. So it goes from the hub in the morning, it goes to points A and B, and then also waits there, pick up some stuff in B, go to C, D, and back to the hub. So you can see that sometimes it's not, the pickup and delivery are not the same route in reverse, because there are different volumes of shipments in different locations. And I'm not going to go too much into it, but something doesn't look totally right when you look at this route, because it kind of goes back and forth. You waste mileage, let's say, for the, if nothing else, and of course fuel and so on, whatever goes with that. So when that happened, the question was, why does the model really recommend that as a solution, despite the waste of cost? And what happened is that the reason was because of time zones. So because your the hub is in a different time zone than the East Coast locations and some of the other locations. I mean, it's the same as the other locations. So you need to deliver pretty quickly first to the East Coast, because it's already, let's say, 7, 8 a.m. there, and then it needs to be delivered to the customer. And then you can go back into the central time zone and deliver there, because they are an hour behind. And same thing in the pickup. You need to pick up first. They are ready first. It's already closing time there at like 6, 7 p.m. And then you can go back to the central time zone and pick up there. So, but in the first glance, we were questioning. And so we had to go back and figure out why this happened. And when you see it, you say, wow, what a great model, right? Analytics is so great. You can find out solutions that you wouldn't think about otherwise. And that's really the strength of analytics. And then there was another type of issue. So you see two delivery routes, the orange and the light blue. And then the same aircraft goes and does some pickups. So the orange aircraft does the pickup, the red pickup, and the light blue does the dark blue. Now they had few, I think about 3 aircraft types. So in this case, there is a 727 and a DC-10. Of course, when you do it, you empty, there are no seats and all, and they just put containers into this empty space of the aircraft. So, right, no problem. This is great. A DC-10 is larger, so probably it delivers and then pickups from locations where they have more shipments. 727 is smaller, so it's great. So the 727 goes to D and F, and then and D and E, and then goes to F and back. And then the DC-10 was the one that delivered into F and then went forward. So F, this location, got a DC-10 that did the deliveries and then pick up shipments by 727. And looks great, right? The client looked at it and say, we cannot do that, because the containers for the DC-10 are much larger than the containers used for the 727, not the same containers. Now, nobody told us that ever. We didn't ask that, probably. It never even came up. And we went and saw the sorting one night, went to the sorting hub and saw the operation. but we really didn't see the containers as they are brought on the different types of aircraft. So we had to go back to the drawing board. Probably I would say one of the most challenging, the model was already ready to go. One of the most challenging problem, and that was an integer program, how to incorporate, doing some constraints, the different types of containers that may suit maybe 2 of the 3 aircraft types that they used. Very challenging. Recommendation, avoid an oops moment, but when it comes, you know, take it with a calm and calculated approach. So with that, we are getting into the last ingredients, and then that's it, the impact. So again, we talked about gaining the user trust, the client trust. That brings you a long way into realizing an impact. And I want to make sure we emphasize again and again, we can have a great model, great solution, great delivery tool and visualization. If after a week it's no longer used where it needs to be used, didn't deliver any impact that the corporation, the entity realizes. So in order to have an impact, we need to have an ongoing usage of the analytics. And for that, we need the client trust. Oftentimes, they will definitely implement it, but sometimes also run in the background, the analytics. We need to communicate the solution it's kind of an art, and you need to be an act. So I want to say that some of you may be aware that Informs has a continuing education program. And the first course was kind of talking about these 7 ingredients and about making analytics happen. Still, I think is being delivered. I just so happened to be on the committee that started the continuing education. So you can see that I was biased towards having such a course to practicing practitioners or people in academia. But one of my dreams was to bring some people from the Alan Alda Stony Brook Institute in Stony Brook University, because I just happened to see on TV, they developed a whole institute that teaches people in science how to explain scientific solution into people that are not aware, you know, they're not science savvy, let's say, through acting. I mean, Alan Alda is an actor. So, and I thought this is tremendous, and I still wish we can put it, I mean, I'll leave it up to Jill to take it on, to put it in this continuing education course. The cost was prohibitive. So, and, you know, have them fly to the location of the course. This was in person, was also prohibitive, but still my dream. You need to act and to kind of use acting, let's say, methodologies, and it's some art to communicate complex solution and analytics modeling into to the client, to the people that are going to use it, because you want to gain their trust and you want to make sure, I'll skip the next one, but you want to make sure it's usable and reusable, right? They keep using it all the time. And it's embedded into the business process. It's part, really, it's part of the way of life there. As business as usual, they run the analytics, they get the results, they may question it, they implement, they realize the impact. And kind of think about change management. So Verizon had at some point a change management expert coming to talk to us. And there is one thing that resonated with me. So apparently when people are really feel threatened, the logical part of the brain shuts down and the emotional takes over, the emotional part. So a lot of time when you try to change the way business was run before by, let's say, implementing some analytics decisions, if people feel threatened, they will just say no, because there is no logic at this point. It's all emotional. They feel threatened, they will need to fight the threat. So what you need to do to mitigate that is to make sure they are part of it. They feel they are not threatened by the solution, but really it's their modeling, their analytics, their solution, their recommendation, their input. And finally, and that's really a hard part for analytics professional, I think everywhere, is to how do you improve the impact, right? So you need to get the trust. How do you really prove the impact? You can compare options, right? So what if I do this? What if I do that? But you cannot really compare them in real time. And sometimes you need to. So you can simulate, of course, and you can take different scenarios and say, okay, what if I close these garages? I could see that. What if I close those garages? I could see that. But this, you just simulate. If they decide, okay, let's try and run for 3 months with the analytics and compare it to what it used to be before, it's good, but sometimes there are other factors that influence to either way, and it's hard to compare. So you have to do your best and again gain the trust. And what I call it this proving impact, what we cannot do is we cannot solve the sliding door effect. So the sliding door is a movie in the 90s about a woman that works in an office and suddenly something happens. She needs to go home earlier than usual. So she's in New York City. She takes the subway. She goes and oops, the door closed and she misses the subway. She waits for the next one, goes home, goes to the apartment that she shares with her boyfriend or fiance. All is good. And then the movie takes us to a parallel universe where she goes to the subway, the door closed and she just barely makes it. And she gets home even earlier and she goes to the apartment and she found her partner with somebody else and then they split, and totally different scenario. We cannot run 2 scenarios in parallel like the movie. So we need to do something, maybe the next best thing. So again, realizing the benefit is the ultimate goal, right? Whatever else we do is great. It serves this particular purpose. So just to kind of sum up all of what we discussed today, secure sponsor and partner client, key, maybe not a bit foreign to us, but we learn with practice too. Solve the right business problem, so extract and solve the right business problem. Try to avoid this oops moment at the end. Guess the best relevant data that you have, but emphasize what you assume also, so you can go back maybe if assumptions change. Make the model innovative, but yet realistic. Time to market is key. So you need to deliver flexible and timely solution, and always question the results. Be ready to change. Be ready for your oops moment. They usually come, I want to say, so more times than not. So and assure the impact. So with that, I'll just let you read a couple of cartoons that talk about, of course, the importance of good data, not just any data, like Dilbert want to make. And then the point that you saw in this visual graph, right? Eventually, we saved you dollars, great. But I would say also, going to the very beginning of the talk, that if analytics and data made it to cartoons, and those are not new ones, that means we made it. So thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions.
Hi, Rina, we did receive a question. Can you share any strategies or tips you use to navigate the push situation to secure the client, especially in those times when the client prefers short-term quick fixes rather than a long-term analytics solution?
Right, so those push times, first of all, we don't always need to deliver at the first this complex analytic solution. So there are times where the client says, okay, I need something quick, and maybe there is a reason for it. because the problem is right there, needs to be solved. So either we solve it by some quick analytics or we just solve it manually. We think we rather solve it by quick analytics, but that also can open the door. It doesn't have to be the ultimate solution. It can open the door for us to have later and say, okay, now we solve this, you know, we put down this fire. Now we can go back and build the house a little better, right? And see what you can do. And also, if you do something quick in the beginning, you gain the trust of the client, they'll come for more. But of course, sometimes you can't, and then you have to really show what's the details and kind of the pros and cons of doing something quick and dirty versus something longer that may take you longer but will deliver better results. But again, only if that option is even a possibility. So you need to kind of navigate. If it's really urgent, then you must deliver something the best you can. Or if it's not so much. But even in this case, I would say, if this is a first-time client, you've never worked with them, try to gain their trust. It is important, because otherwise you can go back, work on this model and great, but they either moved on, and even if it's coming from above, right? It's another push, not just from you, but from an executive that say, do it. It's really, eventually you can do it, and it's going to be implemented, but not used. And again, no impact will be delivered. And again, going back to the neuroscience aspect of it, change management, make sure they don't feel threatened.
Thank you very much. We have another question. Do you generally feel the impact can be measured in an honest and accurate way, or is the impact usually more soft than that?
Honest, yes. Accurate, not always, because of the sliding door challenge, right? We just cannot do that. So the best thing would be if you run the same thing in parallel with the solution and without the solution, and here you go, right? I can't even, rarely happens even. So we just can't. So accurate is accurate enough, and that's where the trust comes. So you can simulate maybe some of what happens, or you can go back. So oftentimes what we do is we go back and we run the model on some things that already happened, right? So we may not have 100% all the elements, but let's say we run it for the shipment. Let's say we're talking about the routing, right? So we run it for the shipment level of last month, and we see what the routes would have been if we use the analytics, compare them to the routes that happen without using the analytics. So we can go backwards to some extent, and that a bit mitigates some of these other factors that if we go in real time or in the future, we don't know what other factors, right? Inflation came suddenly, of course, our forecast goes to a terrible place that's not the forecast. That's what happens in reality in other mitigating or other influencing factors.
Okay, we have another question. Modeling can be a challenge for me. Is there a smart way to remember which data goes where in the modeling?
There are tools today, and some of them I would say I'm not even familiar with, that organizes your data. Modeling is a challenge. I once gave a lecture after I graduated to graduate students, and they asked me, I learned at MIT. So they asked me which class taught me how to do the modeling or how to do this extraction. I guess it's not just the modeling, the extraction of the business problem, translate it into the analytics problem. And it kind of took me by surprise because I had never thought about it before. And I think no class, it comes with time. And hopefully in the beginning, if this is a challenge, you are not doing it alone. You're working with a mentor, somebody that has been there more time, and learn. So it's some of it is art also. So you really need to learn beyond the school learning.
Okay, do we have any other questions from anyone? If so, please add them to either the Q&A or the chat box. We'll wait just a minute for that. Okay, I don't see any more questions right now. So I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for participating. And thank you, Dr. Schneur, for this great presentation. If anyone does think of a question in the future, please email me. I put my email address in the chat box, and I would be happy to share that question with Dr. Schneur for you.
And I'll be happy to respond as the best I can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.